You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sport fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, and you're not. There was a lot of movement in terms of the teams vying for wild card spots in Major League Baseball, so let's discuss that. I'm not going to go game by game. I'm just going to give an overview of the whole situation because there are some updates. The biggest one to me is the Yankees beating the Blue Jays 7-2 yesterday. Thank you, Giancarlo Stanton, for the big 3-run home run that broke the game open. He's absolutely incredible. Say what you want about Stanton, but the reality is, he's just a clutch player. He's turned it on this month to put the Yankees in the driver's seat for a playoff spot. You take a look at what he's done in the playoffs for the Yankees. Last year, he was great. In the Indians and Rays series, he had .308 with 6 home runs and 13 RBIs. Against the Astros in the ALCS in 2019, he had .286. This is the Stanton that you've been waiting to see. I mean, you saw it in 2018, but Stanton still had moments that year that made you furious. He struck out over 200 times. He got booed on opening day. And he really wasn't good in the playoffs that year. Now, Stanton's been playing the outfield more. And there's no question about it. Playing the outfield is helping his hitting. His first game in the outfield this year was July 30th. It was the first game of the Marlins series. Before that game, Stanton was hitting .255 with 16 home runs and 46 RBIs. From the Marlins game on, Stanton has been tearing the cover off the ball. He is hitting .313 with 19 home runs and 50 RBIs. He looks like a different player. The reality is, baseball players are creatures of habit. They fall into a routine that they get comfortable with, and they don't like any variation from that routine. Playing DH, not playing the outfield at all, that's foreign territory for Stanton. In 2018, Stanton DH'd in 86 games, but he played 72 games in the outfield. Not an even split, but pretty darn close. 2019, a lost year for Stanton. He actually played more games in the outfield than he did at DH, 13-5. 2020, only 60 games. Stanton played 23 games as the DH. But even then, he wasn't good last year. I understand only 23 games, but still. Hitting just .250 with 4 home runs and 11 RBIs, I expect more from Stanton than that. You know, here's a guy in Stanton who spent the first 8 years of his career playing right field. And he was a good outfielder. He was a very good outfielder. Obviously, when the Yankees traded for Stanton, they did it with the assumption that he'd play left and DH. You didn't think they'd move Aaron Judge from right field. So Stanton did that in 2018, played well, hit .266 with 38 homers and 100 RBIs. He was their best hitter that year. Then he had a couple lost seasons. He stayed healthy this year. He's played in 134 games. But 104 of those have been as the DH. Again, here's a guy who spent a lot of time in the outfield. And now he's told by Aaron Boone that he's just going to be the full-time DH. His first game in the field was July 30th. There were people criticizing Stanton for not playing the outfield, like that was his fault. Like he's the one who sets the lineup card. How do you know he didn't say to Boone, "Hey, Skip, I want to play the outfield"? Boone doesn't need to listen to Stanton. No, we're going to do what's best for you. You don't know what's best for you. We do. We like you at DH. I mean, it's tough to DH every day if you're not used to it. Think about a guy like Edgar Martinez, one of the best DHs in baseball history. People think that his first year as a DH was 95. It actually wasn't. It was 93. If you'll recall, and it's okay if you don't remember this, but the Mariners had a third baseman by the name of Mike Blowers, former Yankee. And Blowers was a solid third baseman. The plan entering 93 for Lou Piniella's team was for Blowers to be the third baseman and for Martinez to be the DH. What ended up happening? Martinez only played in 42 games. And he wasn't good that year. He had .237 with 4 home runs and 13 RBIs. Then 95 rolls around, and Martinez got used to DHing, and he finished third in MVP voting. He won the batting title. It's very hard to break baseball players of a certain habit. Once you're used to playing the field every day, to switch off that is hard. I mean, people say that as a DH, your mind tends to wander. It's hard to stay locked in a game because you're only part of the game for like 4 or 5 at-bats. When you're in the field, you don't know when your number is going to be called. You don't know when the ball is going to be hit to you. You need to stay ready on every pitch. Meanwhile, a DH, if his team is out in the field, the mind can wander to something like old movies or what you're going to do for dinner tonight. Stanton has gotten very comfortable playing the outfield. You've got to let him do it. I don't know why it took so long for the Yankees to put him in the outfield. And look, I'm okay with Stanton DHing from here on out. The only reason to put Stanton in the outfield would be to put a guy like Luke Voit in the lineup, or maybe Rougned Odor or someone like that. The Yankees seem content with playing Brett Gardner over those guys. I'm not saying I agree with that. I think Voigt's a better player than Gardner. I'm just saying that's what the Yankees are doing. I mean, realize, the Blue Jays started Hyunjin Ryu, one of the better lefties in the game. Who was out there in center field? It wasn't Judge. It wasn't Gallo. It was Gardner. This was a golden opportunity to put another righty in. You put Voit at DH, Judge moves to center, Stanton plays right. Brett Gardner was out there. You want to tell me you didn't want Stanton to play in the Rogers Center with that turf? I can accept that, but it's late September. You've got to stop babying these guys. You can't tell me that Brett Gardner would have been a better option than Luke Voit. Realize, Gardner went 0 for 4. He had 2 strikeouts. It's hard to get too upset because the Yankees did win. But make no mistake about it, Luke Voit at this point is an afterthought for the Yankees. I'd be stunned if you saw him play any more games with the Yankees from here on out unless it's a pinch hitting situation. The opposing team has a lefty in. You don't want Gardner to face a lefty, so you bring in Voit. Either that, or if there's an injury, maybe you'll see Voit. But the reality is, he's an afterthought at this point. I disagree with that. I don't see how you think that Brett Gardner is a better player than Luke Voit. You want to tell me it's because of defense? You'd rather have an outfield alignment of Gallo, Gardner, Judge than Gallo, Judge, Stanton for defensive purposes? I understand that, but I would sacrifice defense for offense. It's much more often that you win a game with your offense than with your defense. I'm not saying that defense isn't important. It is. Late in the game, if you want to move around players to shore up the defense, I get that. I have no problem with that. But to start a game, I'd rather see the best offensive lineup possible. Who knows? Maybe it's like a 10-0 game and you don't need to go crazy with the defensive alignment. I mean, on that point of Stanton playing better when he was playing the outfield more, think about Gleyber Torres. The Yankees had him at short. It wasn't working. His bat really wasn't producing. He was making a lot of errors out there. The Yankees moved him to second From September 13th, his first game at second this year, to now, Torres is hitting .294. From the start of the season to September 12th, he was hitting .252. You want to tell me it's a shorter sample size? You're right, but we're talking about averages here. And still, a 40-point swing in, granted, a short period of time, but still, a 40-point swing is noteworthy. If Gleyber Torres is going to be on this team next year, and it's not a guarantee that he will be, but if he's going to be on this team next year, it will be as a second baseman. And to make matters even better for the Yankees, yes, they won yesterday, but somehow, some way, the Orioles beat the Red Sox 4-2. Chris Sale really wasn't that great. He wasn't awful. He pitched 5 1/3 innings, gave up 3 runs. He struck out 6. He only gave up 4 hits, but against a team like the Orioles, I expect him to be better. I mean, you can't let Pedro Severino have a 3-hit night. If you're the Red Sox lineup, you can't let Bruce Zimmerman, Marcos Diplan, Joey Krebio, and Cole Sulser look like the second comings of Jim Palmer, Dave McNally, Mike Cuellar, and Pat Dobson. I mean, it's getting pretty close to Armageddon for the Red Sox. They're now 2 games behind the Yankees for the top wildcard spot. And if you look behind them, the Seattle Mariners are only half a game out. The Mariners, a team that people, and you can include me in this group, wrote off earlier in the year, are only a half game behind the Red Sox for the second wildcard spot. If I had told you a week ago that we'd be looking at a Yankees-Mariners AL wildcard game, you would have said I was nuts. A week ago, on the 22nd, the Mariners were in the midst of a 6-game win streak. That's very impressive. Good job by them. But they were still 2.5 games behind the second wildcard team. Through the 22nd, that was the Yankees. And the Blue Jays were ahead of the Mariners at that point. The Athletics were only a game behind the Mariners at that point. It looked like the Mariners had no chance whatsoever to make the playoffs. You look at them now, though, they've won 9 of their last 10. They've taken advantage of the Red Sox, Blue Jays, and Athletics cooling off at the worst possible time. I mean, look, the Mariners have a real chance of making the playoffs. They've got 4 games left. They play the Athletics tonight. They're off tomorrow. Then Friday to Sunday, they play the Angels. And just for whatever it's worth, there's a real possibility that Shohei Ohtani could pitch the last game of the season for the Angels. Can you imagine Ohtani starting for the Angels in a must-win game for the Mariners, that's an easy storyline to get behind. You look at the Red Sox, they have 2 games left against the Orioles, then 3 games against the Nationals. So you'd think that breaks well for the Red Sox, but the Mariners just took 2 out of 3 from the Athletics. It's very possible they could sweep them. And the Angels aren't great. I don't care if Ohtani pitches that game. I think it's a fair bet to say that the Mariners will have an easy time with the Angels. Will the Red Sox have an easy time in their last 5 games? I don't know. They should have beaten the Orioles yesterday. They didn't. They should have won at least 1 game against the Yankees at Fenway. They didn't. The Red Sox are free-falling at the worst possible time, and the Yankees and Mariners are taking advantage of them. Give the Yankees and Mariners full credit. But I'll say this. If the Mariners miss out on the playoffs, we need to look back at what happened at the trade deadline as the seminal reason for them falling short. They made 3 trades. They traded Kendall Graveman and Rafael Montero to the Astros for Joe Smith and Abraham Toro. They traded a couple minor leaguers in Carter Binns and Joaquin Tejada to the Pirates for Tyler Anderson. And they traded a solid prospect in Austin Shenton and JT Chargois to the Rays for Diego Castillo. So if you just look at the major league pieces, the Mariners added Smith, Toro, Anderson, and Castillo, but subtracted Graveman, Montero, and Chargois. Those trades really upset the apple cart. Kendall Graveman was really well liked within the organization. He was having an outstanding year as the Mariners closer. Was 4-0 with a .82 ERA. I mean, he had a case to be an all-star. It doesn't matter that you added Diego Castillo a couple days later. It doesn't matter that guys like Drew Steckenrider and Paul Sewald have been good closers for the Mariners. That trade really upset the chemistry of the Mariners. And I don't care what the sabermetric community says. Chemistry is important. So yes, you brought in a solid utility infielder in Abraham Toro. He's turned his season around with the Mariners. Yes, you brought in a good middle reliever in Joe Smith. He's turned his season around with the Mariners. And yes, a couple days later, you traded for Diego Castillo. But you really, really upset the apple cart. In the month of August, the Mariners went 15-13. Granted, not awful, but not great, in my opinion. And this is just my opinion. The Mariners would have been better in that month if they just rode with the players that they have. There was no reason to make those trades. That is the textbook definition of making a trade to make a trade. You see all these other teams getting better, So we want to do something. Let's just do this. No, that's not going to work. I mean, now that guys like Smith and Castillo have become ingratiated into the Mariners, you're seeing the team play better, but that August was really rocky. How's this for a stat? Through July 26th, the day before the first of those 3 trades was made, the Graveman trade, the Mariners were just 1 game behind the Athletics for the second wildcard spot. Through August 31st, they had moved to 3.5 games behind the Red Sox for the second wildcard spot. I mean, the Mariners are having a great September. Make no mistake about it. And if they can pull off this comeback, it'll be really, really impressive. And Scott Service will get some Manager of the Year votes because of that. I'm not saying he deserves Manager of the Year. I think that goes to Kevin Cash in the American League. And in the National League, it goes to Gabe Kapler. But Service will get votes, especially if the Mariners make the playoffs. Meanwhile, in the National League, the Cardinals officially punched their ticket for the playoffs. They will be the second wildcard team. They will travel to Los Angeles to play the Dodgers a week from today. The winner of that game will face the Giants in the NLDS. And let me tell you, the way the Cardinals are playing right now, they can beat the Dodgers in that 1-game playoff. Hell, they could beat the Giants in the NLDS. They could go all the way. They've won 17 straight games. It's nothing short of miraculous what the Cardinals have done this month. Their last loss was on the 10th. They were 3.5 games behind the Padres for the second wildcard spot. They had the Padres and Reds ahead of them, with the Phillies and Mets not far behind them. What have they done since then? They took 2 out of 3 from the Reds. They swept the Mets, they swept the Padres, they swept the Brewers, they swept the Cubs, and they won yesterday against the Brewers. This 17-game win streak is the longest win streak in Cardinals history. And the Cardinals have been around for a really, really long time. We were impressed with the Yankees' 13-game win streak. How about a 17-game win streak to clinch a playoff berth? That's more impressive than what the Yankees did. What the Yankees did was impressive, and it cemented them as a playoff contender. But this win streak got the Cardinals into the playoffs, lock, stock, and barrel. And you know what? Is it impossible to think that the streak could extend to 22? The Cardinals will face the Brewers for 2 more games. Then they'll face the Cubs in a 3-game series. They've won 5 straight against the Brewers. And they just swept the Cubs from Friday to Sunday. I wouldn't bet the rent on the Cardinals winning 22 straight, but it's not impossible. The way they're playing, how can you bet against them? You take a look at guys like Yadier Molina, Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, Edmundo Sosa, Adam Wainwright, Kwang-Hyun Kim, Alex Reyes, Giovanni Gallegos, Genesis Cabrera, Jack Flaherty. The Cardinals are a real threat in the postseason. See, once you get into October, anything can happen. I've heard some people say that it's a bad thing that the Yankees are satisfied with just being the wild card team. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, they'd win the division. But in a perfect world, they'd go 162-0. Just make the playoffs and anything can happen. The last legitimate World Series winner was the 2019 Nationals. If you'll recall, they didn't win the NL East. The Braves did. The Nationals had to beat the Brewers because of an epic 8th inning collapse. Thank you, Trent Grisham. Then they beat the Dodgers in the NLDS. They swept the Cardinals in the NLCS. And they beat the Astros 4 times in Houston. Once you get into the postseason, anything can happen. You're all starting at 0. It's not like you start with an extra win if you win the division. So you only have to win 2 games, and the other team has to win 3. I understand home field advantage. Okay, I get that. That's important. There's no question about that. But what's more important is being there. What's more important is being in a position to go on a crazy run in October. Like, let me ask you something. Let's say the Giants win the NL West, which I think is going to happen. So we're looking at a Dodgers-Cardinals wildcard game. I understand that the Cardinals can beat the Dodgers. I totally get that. But don't you really like the Dodgers' chances? If they get past the Cardinals, don't you really like their chances to beat the Giants, the Brewers, and whoever comes out of the American League? You're all starting at 0 once the postseason hits. Someone who's having a great year can go over in any given series. Someone having a lousy season can be the MVP of any given series. You really don't get that in the other sports. It's usually baseball where the unsung heroes really show up. A guy like Randy Arozarena or Steve Pearce or Edgar Renteria or Jim Leyritz. I'll even go further back. Brian Doyle and Bill Mazeroski, Don Clendenin. Not exactly household names at the time. They turned into heroes because of what they did in the World Series. Anything can happen once the calendar turns to October in the baseball world. I'll close this show out with some NFL Valk talk. Yesterday I spoke about the Chiefs signing Josh Gordon not to be outdone, the team that beat them in this past Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, just signed someone who can make Josh Gordon's life very difficult in Richard Sherman. This is an absolutely outstanding move. It boggles the mind how Sherman stayed unsigned through 3 weeks of the NFL season. I understand that he only played in 5 games last year, and yeah, he took a step back. He had just a 67.7 overall grade, according to Pro Football Focus, the worst grade of his career. But the year before that, he had a 90.3 overall grade. Once upon a time, this guy was probably the best corner in the game. If you tried him with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, it wasn't going to work. You shouldn't have opened your mouth about the best. LOB. Best post-game interview ever. Sherman's a guy who's made 5 Pro Bowls. He's a 3-time first-team All-Pro. Obviously, he won a Super Bowl by annihilating the Broncos at MetLife Stadium. I wanted to go to that Super Bowl so badly, but I didn't. The tickets were just too expensive. Thank God I didn't go. I can just hear it now. Me saying, let's leave after the 3rd quarter. That way we can get home at a reasonable hour. We won't get stuck in traffic. My father would say, Jacob, I paid good money for these tickets. I'm not leaving. I mean, I'll tell you, I actually turned that Super Bowl off. I actually played Madden. I didn't go to a party that year. Watched it at home with my mom. Just wasn't invited. Thanks a lot, friends. Then, after the halftime show, or maybe after Percy Harvin returned the kickoff for the touchdown, I turned the game off. I don't remember exactly when I turned the game off, but I definitely turned the game off and played Madden that whole night. It was just an absolute drubbing by the Seahawks. And Sherman was a big part of that. Yes, he's lost his step, no question, but he's still very good. And when you take a look at the Buccaneers Corners, besides Carlton Davis, none of them are having good seasons. Jamel Dean hasn't looked good, neither is Ross Cockrell, neither is Dee Delaney. Sean Murphy-Bunting got burned in the season opener against the Cowboys. The Buccaneers did need to reinforce their cornerback core. They did that by adding the best free agent corner available, someone who can still contribute, someone who I think is going to have a big impact for them. I like the idea of Sherman in Todd Bowles' defense. Him and Carlton Davis together, watch out. This is an outstanding move by the Buccaneers. Until tomorrow, I'm Jacob Valk, and always remember, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.